afternoon. I hope you have all enjoyed the lunch and feel now energized for the second part of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Jörg Tremmel from Universität Tübingen, who is going to give his keynote address on the justification of the prohibition of politically motivated murder. With a background in philosophy, sociology, political science, and economics, he's a truly interdisciplinary researcher. He gives lectures on intergenerationally just policies and focuses on the question how the interests of generations give a new dimension on existing social cleavages. In this respect, he researches on institutions and mechanisms in modern democracies that are intergenerationally just and sustainable. We are honored that he has joined us today to share his expert knowledge on normative political theory and especially on the philosophical groundwork and exemplification by the ban of politically motivated murder. So please join me in welcoming Professor Tremmel.
Well, thanks very much for the nice introduction, Nora. It's true that I studied all these disciplines, although not in the integrative way which you can do it right now at the Master of PP. When I was a student, it was not possible to study like one discipline. So I studied business administration, political science as two separate fields. Afterwards I completed 2 PhDs, one in social science with a focus on population, and one in philosophy. And finally, I wrote my habilitation in political theory, and today I will present some findings out of this latter work, namely the concept of Archimedean points, which should be of interest for all of you that believe that the terms right and wrong are applicable on normative questions. I also have to add that I'm not a professor anymore. It's the specialty of the German system that you have a junior professorship, which lasts for 6 years, but it's usually without tenure track. And then you can become a Privatdozent, and this is what I am. Well, I guess you know this flag. It's a nice flag in front of this building, and it inspired me this morning. So I took a photograph and put it on the first slide of my presentation. I think to demand students and staff to strive for the truth as an aim relates to the meta-ethical debates about objectivism, relativism, realism, constructivism, naturalism. But most of these terms are ambiguous, and I will use only 2 of them in the course of my presentation: objectivism and relativism. I define objectivism as follows. The terms right and wrong are applicable on scientific hypotheses and theories. Relativism, the terms right and wrong are not applicable. What do I mean by scientific hypotheses and theories? Well, I'll show you examples of all these spheres. We have obviously different spheres where the concepts of objectivism and relativism can be applied, the empirical sciences, and they encompass not only the natural sciences but also parts of the social sciences. The normative sciences, well, you know the problem with the English word science is reserved for natural science, but let's call them normative disciplines like ethics, political philosophy, social philosophy, but also aesthetics and pure questions of taste. Now, this is a little bit more complex. Dividing social sciences in a nomothetic part and an ideographic part, but I don't go into detail with that. But one hypothesis, or some would call it a natural law, from the natural sciences is that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. One theory or hypothesis is that democracies don't wage war against each other. You can make this a probabilistic or a deterministic statement, and this is not important for me. You can call it democracies in 90% of all cases don't wage war against each other. But my question is, if you think such a statement, either deterministic or probabilistic, can be true or false, or correct or incorrect, if you think this is not applicable. In the normative sphere, for instance, one must not murder political opponents. And then maybe in the aesthetics, cubism is better art than Dadaism. I don't know. Vanilla tastes better than chocolate ice cream. So. Now, if you have this objectivism, sorry for the spelling mistake, relativism debate, and apply it now on the different spheres, one can be obviously be a relativist in one sphere and be an objectivist in another sphere. I would like to make a little survey to activate you. Who of you thinks that a statement like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius can be true or let's say correct or incorrect? Who thinks that the terms, that the word correct and incorrect are not applicable? Who is a relativist with regard to the sphere of natural sciences? We cannot apply true or false, correct or incorrect to such a statement, for whatever reasons. There's no discussion here, it's just a vote. Please raise your hand. Who thinks it's not applicable? Because we must be relativists with regard to natural sciences. 1, 2, 3. Oh, 4. Okay, but I want a decision here. Okay, who thinks it is possible to apply correct or incorrect to statements of that kind? Oh, big majority. Who is undecided or thinks he just cannot answer the question? Well, when it comes to the theories, the part of the social sciences which looks for generalities and not for single cases, the distinction between normative and idiographic goes back to Windelband in 1895. And it says, well, there's one part of social. Well, anyway, let's just look at the statement. Who thinks that a statement like democracies don't wage war against each other, be it deterministic, or let's say 90% of all cases don't wage war, is either correct or false? So you're objectivists. Who thinks it's not possible to apply correct or incorrect to such a term? That's a little bit more, much more, maybe half. Okay, now we come to the normative sphere. One must not murder political opponents. That was the question I started on. Who thinks such a statement is either false or true? Okay, we have some objectivists here. Who thinks, no, we cannot apply true or false, correct or incorrect to such a statement?
I have to ask a question. Does it make a difference whether this is an imperative form or not? So the opening example was...
You see the form. Just stick with this example.
Would it make a difference to say murdering political opponents is morally wrong?
Yeah, but that's a different case. We have this concrete case here. And if you change one word, it's a different case.
Okay.
So is this statement applicable to correct or incorrect? Do you say, well, you cannot say it's correct or incorrect, that one must not murder political opponents. Now, again, who thinks relativism is the right stand here? So true or false don't apply to such a statement. Okay, please raise your arm very high. Okay. And who thinks it is possible to apply correct or incorrect to this exact statement? Actually, I will focus on the normative disciplines and will not focus on the empirical disciplines, although this is also very important. This is just not what I will treat today, but I'm aware of the fact that people arrange empirical fields, disciplines, claim purity, saying that some disciplines are more pure whatsoever than others. And sociology, if you Google this, you find so many adaptations, and when people change a little bit around or change the wording of the bubbles. In my view, it's not a question of purity, but of the fluidity of the reality, which is the focus of the relevant disciplines. But that would really be a speech of its own, and I will not go into detail today. I stick with the normative statements, which I call normative hypotheses, as you have already remarked. Okay. Common knowledge is that political philosophers don't know anything. Conventional wisdom has it that normativists are not in the business of producing any knowledge at all. We've seen a mixed picture here. Some of you seem to think that it's maybe the case that they do produce some kind of knowledge, maybe not comparable with the empirical knowledge, but a knowledge sui generis. But others said, well, if I take the vote, if I translate the vote into the question of knowledge producing, some of you seem to think that I don't produce any knowledge. Knowledge may be defined as justified true belief in Aristotle's sense. If there would be something like normative knowledge, this would be a nice criterion to judge the legitimacy of laws. We have had this discussion in the first, after the first presentation yesterday by Mrs. Horn, Dr. Horn, and in my view, there's an overlapping part of law and ethical norms. There are cases which are the norms and the ethical, the laws and the ethical norms point in the same direction or have the same content. For instance, if you think that murder is immoral, which most people do, and you also have a law that makes it illegal, you have the overlapping section. But then you can have ethical norms which are not enshrined in positive law. For instance, moral obligations towards future generations, but also obligations of, hospitality or politeness and so on, which no one makes a law, which no one And on the other hand, and that was also debated yesterday, there might be laws that are not moral, that are immoral. At least if you're not a legal positivist, you would agree with me that the apartheid laws in South Africa were immoral. They were legal, that was by all procedures legal, but maybe immoral. Now, and the question comes up how to judge the legitimacy of laws. And well, if there was something like moral knowledge, that could be a criterion. But, well, it's unclear if something like a moral knowledge does exist. And why do so many people doubt that moral knowledge exists? Because it is so difficult to make judgments. The burdens of judgment, as laid out by Rawls and political liberalism, are probably well known in this audience, but I just repeat them. Rawls says that these burdens explain how reasonable and rational people will permanently disagree about many matters of value and ethics. And we have these persisting conflicts over political and ethical questions, be it abortion, be it, prostitution, be it, almost every question is disputed. And I would assume that the people who are into these disputes are not stupid, they are not idiots. They think long and hard about these questions, but they still come up with different opinions. And Rawls says one reason might be that there are some burdens of judgment, and first one is that empirical and scientific evidence is often complex and conflicting. So he says if the evidence was very, very clear, and it is always very clear in thought experiments, just assume that there is a bridge, and the only question is if it was stable or not. Well, of course, thought experiments can lead us to make our line of thought clear, but the real evidence is different normally. And if it's not easy to see the empirical facts, we can also think about embryo, stem cell research and all this stuff. It's difficult to come up with normative value judgments about them. A second reason that Rawls stated that we may reasonably disagree about the relative weight of different considerations. Granted that there's one pro and one con argument, different weight to all of them. And then the concepts, this is a terminology, the definitions we use, they are vague, and this is a reason why people don't talk to each other, because they define terms in a different way. That's why I never use a term like realism, constructivism, or whatsoever, without defining it right away, because there are, even in encyclopedias of political thought or philosophy, conflicting, incommensurable definitions of these key terms. So this makes it very difficult. And then the way we assess evidence and way values can be shaped by our total life experience. So no one has the life experience of all other human beings. We have lived in a certain context, we haven't visited all the places in the world. We can talk to other people, but still they have a maybe totally different life experience. And this might be a reason why people permanently disagree about ethical and political questions. And also, last but not least, the number of values any social institution can incorporate is limited. Now, this is all granted. It's very difficult to come to normative judgments, but are they really impossible in any case? And here I introduce the concept of Archimedean point. A side glance to Descartes' quest for secured knowledge is instructive here. As commonly known, it is constant doubt which, in his view, leads to knowledge more than anything else does. Every judgment, according to Descartes, initially ought to be treated as prejudice, and the house of knowledge, as he puts it, needs to be built from the bottom up. First, then, we must lay secure foundations, undeniable knowledge claims, from which further insights can be derived deductively. This, from Descartes' point of view, is how the ultimate certainty of his cogito ergo sum, je pense donc je suis, ich denke, also bin ich, is ascertained. In Descartes' view, this statement has the ontological status of an undeniable truth. This is the Archimedean point, still until this day, in philosophy of science. Maybe it's not totally undisputed, but it's a good starting point. And I asked myself, are there such Archimedean points also in axiology, as a separate field from ethics, and in ethics? It's something like cogito ergo sum in the field of axiology, in the field of values. Although one could argue that the preservation or protection of existing human lives, not their creation, is such an Archimedean point, at least under certain conditions. And I would say, well, V1, the value which is maybe an Archimedean point in axiology, is the preservation or protection of existing human life. If the person wants to live on, no intention of suicide, has not committed a deed that is punishable by death, penalty in any state or society of the world, and does not harm any other human being by living on, is already born and not ill, keeping in mind the arguments in favor of abortion and infanticide. Now, I think this could be a candidate on which all axiological schools can agree on. You couldn't construct a case which is at least to a minimum realistic, where people would say, this is not a value which is important to protect. And I come now to the concept of ethics, which is the main part of my presentation. And I would say, well, we can also creatively think of all statements which are so which seem to be so absurd because of their content that everybody thinks they are true or false. As you can read, for instance, this hypothesis: one ought to murder as many randomly chosen children as possible in the most brutal way whenever one is annoyed. This odd proposition is formulated in the affirmative instead of the negative. As you know, it is well established that there are three deontic operators: ought, obligatory, may, permissible, and may not, prohibited. And this matters if one wants to construct the counter-thesis to H1. H1 follows the structure: it is obligatory, then P. Its falsification gives non-H1. It is not obligatory, that P, but formally non-OP. In deontic logic, this is not equivalent to the prohibition O non-P. It is obligatory, that non-P. Non-P would, in fact, not rule out a permission, that P. So the presumed falseness of a command to murder children is a better candidate for an Archimedean point in the realm of normative hypothesis than the presumed rightness of a prohibition to murder children. The obligation to kill instead of the prohibition to kill formulation of H1 for many people intuitively appears to be even more wrong, if there was a comparative or superlative degree of wrong. Now, to give H1 the same thorough consideration like any other normative statement, like you should not smoke in this room, or you should not smoke in university during lectures, strikes many people as utterly absurd. Why is this? Because of the content, of course. Children are almost by definition innocent. Annoyance is a well-known, all-too-human sentiment. Brutality is bad. More brutality is worse. And while one murder is bad, multiple murders are even worse. Since the dawn of morals and legislation, members of societies have pondered the question of how to secure their own survival and improve their coexistence by means of regulating the act of killing to the largest extent possible. The amount of norms prohibiting, or in exceptional cases like in war or death penalty, permitting the killing of people is enormous. Even those who claim that normativists do not possess any knowledge, that, like we have seen, even those who say correct or incorrect are not applicable terms on statements like this one, are usually thrown into hesitation when confronted with the question of whether the prohibition of murder has no binding claim to validity. H1 is aptly chosen so as to prima facie satisfy all kinds of moral theories. If, upon careful scrutiny, H1 would be proven false, then this little shred of insight could constitute a starting point for a body of knowledge concerning all propositions or normative hypotheses. In this case, it might also be possible to judge less dramatic hypotheses as right or wrong, such as claims about politically motivated murders. Politically motivated acts of violence, after all, have been around for as long as relations of domination have existed. So if an Archimedean point in the realm of normative hypothesis was established, social and political philosophy could draw on that. I just assume now that H1 strikes everybody here in this room as wrong. But the challenge lies in showing just why is this so. Maybe you want to take a detour and, let's say, just change a few words, and then it's not so clear. But that's totally forbidden. You wouldn't do the same thing in an empirical hypothesis. If you say water boils at 100 degrees, and someone says, well, under the condition that the air pressure is 1,000, 1,800 hectopascal, it's obviously true, but the same is here. You cannot just change the thesis in a way you want to, and then say, okay, now I have a way to say it's not possible to judge this as true or false. This is the thesis to judge. If you say, this is wrong, then we have a little shred of normative knowledge, and that could give rise to a new objectivism and would be an argument against the relativism. Well, why could this be considered wrong? There are different procedures to assess the universalizability of normative hypotheses. One of them is a weight of ignorance model, and it says that an hypothesis N is universalizable if it would be chosen under the weight of ignorance. That someone who has identified with all affected people for any hypothesis, be it smoking in university or in a hospital, or be it assassination. And if such an ideal observer would then say it's correct or incorrect, it is. This is a way to establish the validity of this claim. Another procedural way to assess is a discourse model, Alexei Habermas, and it says that any hypothesis is universal if all affected people would have agreed to it after having conducted a deliberation guided by certain rules. Ideal speech situation enabling opinion changes according to the forceless force of the better argument. There's a completely different way of approaching it, but Habermas is one of the protagonists of a consent theory of truths, and he also says what is established in an ideal speech situation can be considered true. And then we have Kant's categorical imperative, which I just mentioned. Well, maybe you already want to jump in, but I will just quickly go from here to the political sphere, because as a political philosopher, someone who's actually working in an empirically oriented institute at the University of Tübingen, being the only one who doing some philosophical groundwork there, I'm interested in the political realm, and especially normative statements in that area. So I would say we make a new hypothesis, H2 actually. In a democratic and well-ordered society, applicants for political offices should not murder their competitors, if the latter act peacefully in every respect and don't try to change the democratic order. This is maybe not so clear as the one with the innocent children, but it also rules out a lot of counterexamples. You could come up with the example of a revolution which is justified, or with an unfair world system. But whatever counterexample you construct, this hypothesis will hold. You cannot construct a counterexample because it says peacefully in every respect. So you must then, say it is not peaceful in every respect because of, but then you have another hypothesis. And if you test this hypothesis with all these models, weight of ignorance model, the impartial observer, and so on, you will probably see that they all come to the same conclusion, and that it is actually correct. Now, my conclusion is that politically motivated murders, the so-called assassinations, are not moral, not legitimate, and not legal. By trying to answering the starting question, how, if at all, can the prohibition of politically motivated murder be justified? I introduced the concept of Archimedean points, or at least one Archimedean point, to show a way in which this normative statement can possibly be justified. Is my concept now objectivist or relativist? Well, like Professor Peter this morning, I hold that this dichotomy is not complex enough. It's in fact oversimplified. My concept, like hers, is a hybrid one. I state that there are a few, or at least one, normative hypothesis that can count as normative knowledge in the objectivist sense. At the same time, normative knowledge is very hard to reach, and the scientific community has not reached much of it yet. But I hope that I could show that striving for the truth, also in the normative sphere, is not a futile endeavor. Maybe the concept of Archimedean points in ethics can pave the way for the next generation of philosophers. For instance, for you, my dear audience. Thank you.